The opulent chandelier cast a kaleidoscope of light across the polished marble floor, each crystal prism a miniature stage for the swirling anxieties within Shinruajing. The air, thick with the perfume of lilies and the murmur of affluent chatter, pressed against her like a physical weight. Her fingers tightened around the small hand of her son, Chu Tianai. He, oblivious to the tension coiling in his mother's stomach, tugged impatiently at her sleeve, his gaze fixed on a towering display of elaborately decorated cupcakes. "Mama, cake," he whispered, his voice a sweet counterpoint to the discordant symphony in Ruojing's mind. Just yesterday, she had been here, in this very hotel, with Chu Zichen. The memory, so vivid, so real, now felt like a phantom limb, a painful reminder of something lost. They had laughed, shared whispered secrets against the plush pillows, and promised what had they promised. The details blurred, obscured by a rising tide of panic. Had he not spoken of a future, of a life together? Had she imagined the warmth in his eyes, the tenderness in his touch? Swallowing the lump in her throat, Ruojing approached the reception desk, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The receptionist, a young woman with meticulously styled hair and an impassive expression, barely glanced up from her computer screen. "How may I help you, madam?" The formality, the detachment, grated on Ruojing's raw nerves. "I'm looking for someone," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "He was staying here, we were staying here last night." The words felt clumsy, inadequate to convey the urgency clawing at her insides. Tianai, sensing his mother's distress, tightened his grip on her hand, his small face creased with concern. The receptionist's gaze finally met hers, cool and assessing. "Name, please." "Chu Zichen," Ruojing replied, the name of fragile hope clinging to the precipice of despair. The receptionist's fingers danced across the keyboard, the rhythmic tapping echoing the frantic beat of Ruojing's heart. Seconds stretched into an eternity, each tick of the clock amplifying the growing hollowness in her chest. "And your name, madam?" "Shen Ruojing," she responded, a flicker of defiance igniting within her. She was Shen Ruojing, his lover, the mother of his child. Why did she feel the need to justify her existence, her connection to him? The receptionist's expression remained unchanged, her fingers still dancing across the keyboard. The silence stretched, taut and suffocating. Finally, she looked up, her eyes devoid of warmth. "I'm sorry, madam, but there is no record of a Mr. Chu Zichen staying here last night." A cold dread washed over Ruojing, numbing her from the inside out. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle hum of the air conditioning. "We were here. Room 808. I rechecked in yesterday afternoon." The memory, once so clear, now felt slippery, elusive. Had she imagined it all? Was she losing her mind? "Miss, I just checked the check-in records of last night. You're the only one registered in room 808. The receptionist's voice, though polite, held a subtle undercurrent of dismissal, a hint of pity that stung more than outright hostility. Ruojing's mind reeled, grasping for an explanation, a lifeline in the swirling vortex of confusion. Had he used a different name? Had he left without her? But why? The questions piled up, each one a sharp shard of glass piercing the fragile illusion of their love. Tianai, sensing his mother's distress, tugged at her hand again. "Mama, are you okay?" His small voice, filled with innocent concern, was a painful reminder of the stakes. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about their future, their son's future. I don't understand," she stammered, her voice thick with unshed tears. She clung to the reception desk, the smooth, cool marble a stark contrast to the burning heat in her cheeks. She had to be strong, for Tianai, for herself. She couldn't fall apart, not here, not now. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Ruojing forced herself to meet the receptionist's gaze. "Are you sure?" Could you check again? Maybe there's been a mistake. The receptionist sighed, a barely perceptible sound of impatience. Madam, I've already checked twice. There's no record of a Mr. Chutsichin. Perhaps you're mistaken about the hotel? The suggestion, though subtle, felt like a slap in the face. Mistaken? How could she be mistaken? The memory of Tsichin's hand in hers, the warmth of his breath against her ear, was as real as the ache in her heart. No, she said, her voice regaining a sliver of its former strength. I'm not mistaken. He was here. We were here together. A sudden thought, a terrifying possibility, pierced through the fog of confusion. Did something happen to him? The receptionist's expression softened slightly, a flicker of genuine concern replacing the professional detachment. Madam, if you're concerned for his safety, I suggest you contact the police. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. The police? Was she seriously considering reporting him missing? What if he simply left? What if he'd changed his mind? The thought, though painful, was a perverse comfort compared to the alternative. She glanced down at T&I, his small face upturned, his eyes wide with unspoken questions. She couldn't bear to let him see her crumble. She had to be strong, for him. Straightening her shoulders, Ruojing forced a smile, a brittle facade masking the turmoil within. Thank you, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I'll think about it. Turning away from the desk, she led T&I towards the exit, her mind racing, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. Where was Chutsichin? And what was she going to do now? The fluorescent lights of the police station hummed, a sterile, buzzing counterpoint to the frantic beat of Ruojing's heart. The plastic chair beneath her felt cold and unyielding, each minute spent waiting etching the chill deeper into her bones. The air hung thick with the stale scent of disinfectant and despair, a grim cocktail that clung to the back of her throat. She shifted uncomfortably, tugging at the hem of her dress. It was the same dress she'd worn to the Chu family birthday party, a hopeful splash of crimson now stained with the invisible grime of rejection. 6 months, she thought, the words a bitter echo in the hollow chambers of her mind. 6 months of whispered promises, shared laughter, stolen kisses. How could it all have been a lie? A young officer, his face smooth and impassive, finally called her name. Hope flickered, a fragile butterfly against the harsh reality of the room. She followed him to a small, sterile office, the metallic tang of the desk adding another layer to the oppressive atmosphere. He gestured to a chair, his movements perfunctory, detached. Ruojing sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a desperate attempt to contain the tremor that threatened to betray her composure. So, Ms. Shen, the officer began, his voice flat, devoid of any inflection, you're reporting a missing person? Yes, Ruojing replied, her voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil raging within. She recounted the story again, each word carefully chosen, each detail meticulously laid out like precious jewels on a tarnished platter. She spoke of Chutsichin, of their relationship, of his sudden, inexplicable disappearance. With each syllable, she felt a sliver of her hope erode, replaced by a creeping dread that coiled in the pit of her stomach. The officer's expression remained unchanged, a mask of professional indifference. His gaze, however, held a subtle flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher: skepticism, pity, disdain. As she spoke, Ruojing could almost feel the weight of his disbelief pressing down on her, suffocating her with its silent judgment. They think I'm crazy, she realized, the thought a sharp, painful splinter in her mind. They think I've imagined it all. The carefully constructed facade she'd maintained began to crumble, the cracks widening with each unanswered question, each dismissive glance. The officer's pen scratched across his notepad, the sound grating against the silence. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a cool, detached scrutiny that sent a shiver down her spine. Ms. Shen, he said, his voice laced with a weary patience, we've checked. There's no record of a Chen matching your description. The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. The room seemed to spin, the fluorescent lights blurring into a dizzying kaleidoscope. That's impossible, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. He has to exist. He has to. Images of Chen flooded her mind, his smile, his touch, the warmth of his hand in hers. These memories, so vivid, so real, clashed violently with the officer's stark denial. Ma'am, the officer said, his tone hardening, the person you're talking about doesn't exist. The finality in his voice was a crushing weight, shattering the last vestiges of her hope. The world tilted precariously, the edges blurring into a hazy, indistinct mess. Ruojing gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles white, fighting to maintain a semblance of control. He doesn't exist. The words echoed in her mind, a chilling refrain that threatened to unravel the very fabric of her reality. Had she truly imagined everything? Had the past 6 months been nothing but a cruel, elaborate delusion? She wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all, but the words caught in her throat, choked by a rising tide of despair. The officer continued, his voice a droning monotone, reciting procedures, outlining protocols, words that held no meaning, no comfort. Ruojing stared at him, her eyes wide, unseeing. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, suffocating her with the weight of his disbelief. She stumbled out of the police station, the midday sun assaulting her eyes after the sterile gloom of the interior. The city noise, usually a vibrant hum, now grated on her nerves, a cacophony of meaningless sounds. Each passing face seemed to mock her, their expressions a silent indictment of her perceived delusion. He doesn't exist. The words reverberated in her mind, a relentless torment. She walked aimlessly, her feet carrying her through the crowded streets, her mind a swirling vortex of confusion and despair. The world felt alien, distorted, as if she were viewing it through a fractured lens. The familiar comfort of reality had been ripped away, leaving her adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Where was Chen? Why had he disappeared? And more importantly, if he didn't exist, who was the father of her child? The questions clawed at her, sharp talons tearing at the fragile remnants of her sanity. The weight of the unknown pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating, threatening to engulf her in its dark embrace. She wrapped her arms around herself, a futile attempt to ward off the chill that seeped into her bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the icy grip of fear that had settled deep within her soul. The bustling city, the indifferent faces, the relentless noise, it all faded into a meaningless backdrop to the silent scream of her despair. The crystal chandeliers cast a kaleidoscopic rain of light across the marble floors, each facet reflecting the opulence of the Chu family mansion. The air, thick with the perfume of lilies and the murmur of polite conversation, vibrated with an undercurrent of tension Shen Ruojing could almost taste. She clutched Xiaoming's small hand, the warmth a stark contrast to the icy dread creeping up her spine. Tianai, ever stoic, walked beside her, his small hand gripping hers, their two intertwined hands offering a sliver of courage in the face of the glittering, hostile crowd. Stepping into the ballroom felt like walking into a lion's den, the lavish decorations mocking her simple dress, the elegantly dressed guests seeming to scrutinize her with every glance. 6 months, she thought, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. 6 months of whispered promises, stolen kisses, shared laughter, were they all a lie? "Mommy, it's loud," Xiaoming whispered, her voice barely audible above the string quartet's melody. Ruojing forced a smile, smoothing down her daughter's hair. "It's a party, sweetheart. There are lots of people celebrating. Celebrating a life I was never a part of," a bitter voice echoed in her mind. The opulent ballroom, the glittering gowns, the forced smiles, it was a world away from the quiet intimacy she'd shared with Chen. Had he ever intended to bring her here? To introduce her to this world? The doubt, a venomous serpent, coiled tighter around her heart. A sharp, brittle laugh cut through the air, followed by a voice dripping with condescension. Isn't this the eldest Miss Shen who was kicked out of the house? Lin Wanru, resplendent in a scarlet gown that screamed wealth and status, stood before her, a smirk playing on her lips. Ruojing's breath hitched. She recognized the malice in Lin Wanru's eyes, the same look she'd seen countless times from the society matrons who had once been her peers. They see me as a fallen woman, a disgrace, she realized, the shame burning in her throat. She straightened her spine, refusing to cower. Lin Wanru, she acknowledged, her voice surprisingly steady. A ripple of whispers spread through the nearby guests, their curious gazes darting between Ruojing and Lin Wanru. The music seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the hushed anticipation of a brewing storm. Ruojing could feel their judgment, their silent condemnation, weighing her down. They think I'm here to create a scene, to beg for scraps, she thought, her fists clenching at her sides. But I'm not. I'm here for answers. What brings you here, Shen Ruojing? Lin Wanru continued, her eyes glinting with malicious amusement. Surely you're not expecting a warm welcome after the scandal. The unspoken word hung heavy in the air, a reminder of her family's downfall, of her own perceived disgrace. Ruojing took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet Lin Wanru's gaze. I'm here to see Chu Zichen. Lin Wanru's smirk widened. Zichen? My fiancé. I'm afraid he's a little busy at the moment. Perhaps you should have made an appointment. Her words, laced with venom, struck a nerve. Fiancé. Ruojing's world tilted. 6 months and he was engaged the entire time. The realization was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Before Ruojing could respond, a chorus of gasps erupted from the surrounding guests. A middle-aged woman, her face contorted in a mixture of shock and disgust, pushed her way to the front. The father of his child is Chu Zichen, she declared, her voice shrill. All eyes turned to Tianai and Xiaomeng, clinging to Ruojing's legs. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Xiaomeng's soft whimper. Miss Shen, another woman interjected, her tone laced with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Which table are you going to sit at? The question, seemingly innocent, dripped with sarcasm. Ruojing's mind raced. She hadn't considered seating arrangements. She hadn't considered anything beyond finding Zichen. They think I'm here for the party, for the food, for the chance to rub shoulders with the elite, she thought, a wave of nausea washing over her. They have no idea. I'm not here to sit, Ruojing stated, her voice trembling slightly. I'm here for answers. She drew in a shaky breath and revealed the truth she had been dreading to share. I'm pregnant. With Zichen's child. The revelation hit the room like a bombshell. The murmurs escalated into a cacophony of whispers, the air crackling with disbelief and outrage. Mrs. Chu, Zichen's mother, emerged from the crowd, her face pale with fury. Preposterous, she exclaimed, her voice laced with ice. How dare you slander my son with such lies? Security. Ruojing felt a surge of panic. They don't believe me, she realized, her heart sinking. They'll never believe me. But then, a flicker of defiance ignited within her. I'm not lying, she insisted, her voice gaining strength. I have proof. She gestured towards Tianai. He is Zichen's son. The suggestion of a DNA test hung in the air, a challenge thrown down amidst the opulent backdrop of the Chu family's celebration. Mrs. Chu, her eyes narrowed, regarded Tianai with a mixture of suspicion and contempt. A DNA test, she echoed, a cruel smile twisting her lips. Very well. If you're so certain, let's put your claims to the test. The implication was clear, Ruojing was setting herself up for humiliation, for public disgrace. But Ruojing held her ground, her gaze unwavering. I have nothing left to lose, she thought, a steely resolve hardening her expression. I will fight for my children. I will find Sichin. And I will get my answers. The party, the music, the glittering guests, they all faded into the background, leaving only the raw, pulsating tension of the impending confrontation. The crystal chandeliers cast a brittle, glittering light over the opulent ballroom, reflecting off the shocked faces of the Chu family. Mrs. Chu's hand, adorned with a jade ring the size of a pigeon's egg, trembled as she clutched the DNA report. A hush, thick and suffocating, descended upon the room, punctuated only by the faint clinking of champagne flutes abandoned on silver trays. Shen Ruojing felt a peculiar detachment from the scene, as if she were watching a play unfold within a frosted glass box. Just moments ago, she had been an unwelcome intruder, a woman scorned, her claims dismissed as the ramblings of a delusional lover. Now, the very air crackled with unspoken accusations and shifting alliances. She looked down at Tianai, her son, his small hand tucked securely in hers. He seemed oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred, his attention captured by a stray balloon bobbing near the ceiling. My son. Sichin's son, the realization, stark and undeniable, sent a shiver down her spine. The DNA test results are back, Mrs. Chu's voice, normally sharp and commanding, wavered, barely audible above the sudden rush of whispers that erupted from the assembled guests. Ruojing's sister, Ruotong, stared at her with a mixture of disbelief and something akin to awe. Ruotong had always been the beautiful one, the favored one. Now, the balance of power, the unspoken hierarchy of their family, had irrevocably tilted. Is this what triumph feels like? Ruojing wondered, but the emotion was muted, overshadowed by a bone-deep weariness. The child is yours, Mrs. Chu finished, her gaze fixed on the empty space where Chu Zichin should have been. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Lin Wanru's sharp intake of breath. Lin Wanru, her face a mask of disbelief, snatched the report from Mrs. Chu's hand. Her carefully constructed composure crumbled, replaced by a raw, venomous glare directed at Ruojing. This is impossible. This lying woman must not be spared. Her voice, shrill and laced with desperation, sliced through the silence. Ruojing could almost taste the bitterness of Lin Wanru's defeat, a bitter tang in the air. Lying woman, the accusation ignited a spark of anger within Ruojing. She had endured humiliation, disbelief, and outright hostility, all for the sake of finding Sichin, for the sake of her children. Now, this woman, this pretender, dared to call her a liar. I have never lied, Ruojing stated, her voice calm but unwavering, each word a stone dropped into the still waters of the ballroom. She met Lin Wanru's gaze, refusing to flinch. Unlike some, I haven't needed to fabricate a relationship to secure my place. Lin Wanru's eyes widened, a flicker of fear momentarily eclipsing her anger. Ruojing's words had struck a nerve, a truth she had desperately tried to conceal. The carefully constructed facade of her relationship with Sichin, the lavish engagement, the public displays of affection, all a meticulously crafted lie. You know nothing. Lin Wanru hissed, her voice barely a whisper. But the denial lacked conviction, the desperation seeping through the cracks of her composure. She took a step towards Ruojing, her face contorted with rage. I know enough, Ruojing replied, her voice low and steady. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that Lin Wanru's secrets ran deeper than a fabricated engagement. The whispers, the veiled allusions to her past, now coalesced into a disturbing picture. The way Lin Wanru had clung to Sichin, the desperate need for validation, the subtle manipulations, it all pointed to a carefully constructed web of deceit. The tension in the room crackled like static electricity. The guests, initially shocked into silence, now murmured amongst themselves, their whispers like the rustling of dry leaves in the wind. Mrs. Chu, her face pale and drawn, seemed to have aged 10 years in the span of a few minutes. She looked from Ruojing to Lin Wanru, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and betrayal. The argument escalated, fueled by years of unspoken resentment and hidden truths. Lin Wanru, driven by desperation and a primal fear of losing everything, lashed out, her words venomous, her accusations wild and unfounded. Ruojing, initially determined to maintain her composure, found her patience wearing thin. The constant accusations, the insidious insinuations, chipped away at her restraint. "You think you've won?" Lin Wanru shrieked, her voice echoing through the ballroom. "You think having his child gives you some kind of claim? Zichen will never choose you. He never loved you." The words, cruel and deliberately aimed to wound, struck their target. Ruojing felt a sharp pang of pain, a raw ache in her chest. Despite the evidence, despite the DNA results, a sliver of doubt remained. Had Zichen truly loved her? Or had she been a fool, blinded by her own desires? But before the doubt could fester, a surge of protective anger washed over her. She would not let this woman, this viper, poison her son's future. "He may not have chosen me," Ruojing said, her voice trembling with suppressed fury, "but he is Tinya's father. And I will ensure that my son receives everything he is entitled to." The argument descended into chaos. Accusations flew like daggers, voices rising in a crescendo of anger and recrimination. In a fit of rage, Lin Wanru lunged at Ruojing, her nails outstretched like claws. Ruojing, instinctively reacting, sidestepped the attack and pushed Lin Wanru away. Lin Wanru stumbled, her high heels catching on the polished marble floor, and she fell, her body hitting the ground with a sickening thud. A gasp rippled through the room. The fight, raw and visceral, had stripped away the veneer of civility, exposing the raw emotions simmering beneath the surface. The opulent ballroom, once a symbol of the Chu family's wealth and power, now felt like a battleground, the air thick with tension and the unspoken promise of further revelations to come. The truth, like a shattered mirror, lay scattered across the floor, its sharp edges reflecting the fractured relationships and the uncertain future that awaited them all. The opulent chandelier, still glittering despite the thinning crowd, cast long, distorted shadows across the marble floor. The remnants of the birthday celebration, half-eaten cakes, abandoned champagne flutes, scattered confetti now seemed like mocking reminders of the chaos that had just erupted. Shen Ruojing felt a tremor run through her, a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Just moments ago, she had been the outcast, the delusional woman claiming a relationship with the elusive Chu Zichen. Now, the truth, raw and shocking, hung heavy in the air, thick as the lingering scent of expensive perfume. "Impossible," Mrs. Chu whispered, her face ashen, her gaze flitting between Ruojing and the two children clinging to her skirt. Tianai, his small hand gripping Ruojing's dress, looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. Xiaomeng, usually so vivacious, remained unusually quiet, her thumb tucked firmly in her mouth. Ruojing felt a surge of protectiveness. These were her children, her and Zichen's. The thought, so recently a source of anxiety and uncertainty, now filled her with a strange sense of power. Lin Wanru stood frozen, her carefully crafted composure shattered. Her eyes, usually sparkling with calculated charm, were now wide with a mixture of disbelief and terror. Ruojing watched her, a flicker of something akin to pity, no, not pity, understanding crossing her heart. Lin Wanru, trapped in her own web of lies, had become a victim of her own ambition. "The DNA test results are back," a stern voice announced. It was Chu Zichen's uncle, his face grim, a sheaf of papers clutched in his hand. He addressed Mrs. Chu, his voice laced with a mixture of respect and reproach. These confirm that Tianai and Xiaomeng are indeed Sichen's children. And, he paused, his gaze shifting to Lin Wanru, further analysis indicates that the children's recent illness was caused by poisoning. The word hung in the air, a venomous whisper. Ruojing felt a chill run down her spine. She had been so focused on finding Sichen, on proving her relationship, that she hadn't fully grasped the danger her children had been in. A wave of nausea washed over her as she recalled their sudden fevers, their listlessness. She squeezed Jinye's hand, her heart pounding in her chest. Lin Wanru's face drained of all color. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a choked gasp escaped. "No, it's not me," she stammered, her voice barely audible. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, a lifeline. But there was none. The evidence, cold and irrefutable, had sealed her fate. Lin Wanru, Mrs. Chu's voice was low, dangerous. The disappointment, the betrayal, radiated from her in waves. Ruojing had initially feared this woman, this embodiment of wealth and power. Now, she saw only a mother whose trust had been shattered. "You vicious woman." Mrs. Chu's voice was laced with venom, each word a poison dart. "I welcomed you into my family, treated you like my own daughter." Her voice broke, the facade of composure crumbling. "And you tried to harm my grandchildren?" The room fell silent. The only sound was Lin Wanru's ragged breathing. Ruojing watched her, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. This woman, who had caused her so much pain, so much anguish, now seemed small, insignificant. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by a hollow despair. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. Chu Zichen. His face, usually so composed, was etched with weariness and a deep, simmering anger. He walked straight to Ruojing, his gaze intense, searching. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Ruojing looked into his eyes, a torrent of emotions swirling within her. Relief, love, exhaustion, confusion. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He turned to his uncle, his voice cold and hard. "Have the authorities been contacted?" His uncle nodded. "They are on their way." Sichen's gaze swept across the room, settling on Lin Wanru. "I'll shoot you," he said, his voice low and menacing, each word dripping with ice. It wasn't a threat, Ruojing realized. It was a promise. The arrival of the police punctuated the tense silence. Lin Wanru, her spirit broken, offered no resistance as they led her away. The party, meant to celebrate a new beginning, had instead exposed a nest of vipers, a web of deceit that had almost destroyed their family. Later, as the chaos subsided, Zichen explained everything. His sudden disappearance, the orchestrated silence, the fabricated narrative of their non-existent relationship, all a desperate attempt to protect Ruojing and the children from a hidden enemy, a threat he hadn't fully understood until it was almost too late. Lin Wanru, blinded by ambition and jealousy, had become a pawn in this dangerous game. She had manipulated the situation, hoping to eliminate Ruojing and secure her position within the Chu family. Ruojing listened, her heart aching for the man beside her. The burden he had carried, the sacrifices he had made, the pain he had endured, it was almost too much to bear. She reached out, her hand finding his, their fingers intertwining. "We'll be okay," she whispered, the words a promise, a prayer. He squeezed her hand, a faint smile touching his lips. "We will," he replied, his gaze meeting hers, a silent understanding passing between them. The journey had been arduous, fraught with pain and uncertainty. But they had survived. Together. And as they stood there, amidst the wreckage of the past, they could finally begin to build their future. A future where truth had triumphed over lies, where love had conquered fear, and where their family, once fractured and broken, could finally heal. The shadows of the past still lingered, but the dawn of a new day was breaking, promising warmth, light, and the enduring power of love.